In today's episode of HR Visionaries, we talk to Laura. We talk about values and how values shape organizations. Stay tuned. Welcome to HR Visionaries, where we unlock the secrets of modern HR. I'm Benjamin, your host. Join us as we shed light on today's HR universe with HR leaders and innovators from across the globe. Whether you're an HR pro, a business leader, or just curious about the future of work, this is your shortcut to the forefront of HR innovation. Brought to you by Hire, the AI talent attraction platform. Welcome to the latest episode of HR Visionaries. I'm looking very much forward to my guest today, Laura. It's amazing to have you on HR Visionaries.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Laura, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you?
I am currently the Chief People Officer for Typeform. I am located in a small city in the Bay Area, California. And Typeform, for those of you that don't know, it is a company that helps businesses get the data they need with forms that people really enjoy and respond to. We have more than 150,000 businesses, from small startups to large enterprises, that are creating and using our products every day. And we have upward of 500 million submissions every year. So it's a very exciting business to be part of. I've been here for, it'll be 3 years this June. But I've been in the field of human resources for longer than 2 decades. And so my career spans across multiple industries, from medical devices to life sciences to banking to tech, mostly larger companies. Typeform is my first smaller company that I've been part of, and I've enjoyed the ride so far.
It's super exciting. How come you moved from banking tech, from very large companies to to scale up?
Yeah. So the first part of my career was really spent in health sciences, and it's a very highly regulated industry, but it's also an industry that you just kind of pulls at your heartstrings, right? Because you're really doing things that are saving people's lives. So I worked for 10 years at a company called PerkinElmer, and I loved every moment of it. I learned everything I know about HR while working there. And when the opportunity came to move, I went to banking for a short period of time. Didn't like it as much. It was also a very highly regulated industry.
I can tell.
A bit too regulated for my taste. And then the first time I made the move into tech was at Autodesk, and I spent almost 8 years with Autodesk, and I loved the tech industry, loved how quickly it moved, just full of smart, people, and you were really, again, doing things that were changing the world around you. So I knew I wanted to stay in tech, but I was also getting burned out, I think, a little bit working at a larger company. Things do move a lot slower, and I have always been a builder at heart. I like to build things, whether it's teams, whether it's organizations. I like to help companies solve business problems. And when the opportunity at Typeform came, it was the right time in my career. I felt like I had, up to that point, done a lot of things and had gotten a lot of experience along the way. And I felt that it was time to kind of share that experience. And, Typeform wanted me to come in and help the company scale up. And they were specifically looking for somebody who had been there and done that, as they said, and so it was an opportunity to build something from scratch and be responsible from start to finish. And that really kind of spoke to me. And honestly, I think it had a lot to do with just the phase of life I was in. I was ready for that move, and I'm glad I did.
Well, this step from a large organization to a smaller organization, well, it also comes with, well, lots of challenges. Well, building something from scratch always sounds a bit exciting. At the same time, it comes with lots of challenges. Probably sometimes you do stuff you haven't done in ages because you had junior personnel for that, and now you do it yourself for a few months before, well, people can join to take over this work.
I mean, you're very hands-on for sure. But I've always been a very hands-on leader. And you have to learn when you need to lean in and when you need to also let go. And that has a lot to do with just the team that you have around you or the team that you build around you. And whether you're in a small company or a large company, I think you're always assessing, do I have the right people around me? Are there places where I need to lean in more as a leader, be more instructive in how I coach and how I ask for things? Or are there times when I'm working with folks who have more experience and I can just say, okay, this is what we need to do, and they go off and do it. So you're always doing that assessment as a leader, whether you're in a big company or a small company. You're probably doing it a little bit more when you're in a smaller company. So yeah, that was that wasn't the biggest difference for me. The biggest difference was just the amount of education that needed to happen. I say this often, is that surprised me, that kind of coming in and having to educate either people on my own team or leaders that I supported or even the employee population on just things that they've never gone through before, like a formal talent review process or a deep understanding of total compensation or total rewards, explaining those HR practices that are so formal in bigger companies require a lot of kind of socializing at a smaller company who's hearing about it for the first time.
When you implement, when you implement new methods, so for example, of performance review, you perhaps sometimes need to compromise a bit. So like in a large organization, it's all very, very kind of close to perfect. So very many people working on this. In a smaller organization, it has to be like, okay, perhaps it needs to be rough and dirty until we can improve in the next iteration phase. How easy did you find, first of all, was it kind of what you experienced? And then secondly, how did you feel about, well, where can I compromise and where can't I compromise?
I'd be lying if I said it was easy, just because I'm a perfectionist. So, you hear a lot about, MVP and, iterating on process, especially when you're in tech. It's all about, MVP and moving fast and iterating. So I heard that a lot too when I was at Autodesk, but it comes very difficult for people that have a perfectionist personality, and I've got a little bit of that. I've gotten a lot better over time, where I've had to kind of learn to say, all right, what's absolutely necessary, what can we do later? You have to learn to live with less than perfect and know that you're going to be iterating on things over time. So it was definitely a learning process for me. But it's always been a challenge for me, just because, like I said, I have a perfectionist personality. But coming into a startup environment, a smaller environment, I wouldn't call Typeform a startup. We've been around for 10 years. I would call us a very efficient, smaller organization, efficient and successful smaller organization. It was, okay, where is really the value in what we're trying to do? For example, if I think about something like the performance review process, is the value really in the process itself? Meaning, do I have the right platform, the right technology to support that, or the right training for managers and employees on how to, navigate through our performance review process? Or is the value in the conversations that we want employees to have, managers to have? And the answer is, it's the value is in the conversation. We want to build out a muscle that encourages frequent, helpful, robust conversations between employees and their managers on an ongoing basis. That's the value, right? I don't need a very shiny process to accomplish that. What I need is enabled managers. What I need is to focus on training. What I need is to focus on, coaching tools that enable those conversations to be robust. So when you kind of go through your mind and you say, all right, why are we doing this? What's the most important thing we want to get out of it? Process becomes a little less important.
How do you decide where to be perfect and where to not to, where perfection is not absolutely necessary?
It's really those things where if you're not getting things right, you stand a chance of eroding trust in the organization of the employees, right? There are like certain things you just can't mess up. You can't mess up people's pay. You can't play around with that. You can play around with benefits, right? Those are very important to people, like medical coverage and things like that. So people take their compensation very seriously, as they should. So you want to make sure that you have a very transparent, robust process when it comes to folks understanding what your process is for getting promoted, what your process is for, evaluating their pay, your salary ranges, things like that. Like there's certain things that are very important to people, that if you are not open and transparent and you land it right, you erode trust. So that's how I think about it, is how does it measure up in the perspective of the employee? And also, honestly, is it something that could also land you in trouble as a company? So there's certain things that you got to do around compliance. Each country has their own rules and regulations. So those are also things that I would say you can't compromise on.
When so some of the people who listen to our podcast are probably from larger organizations. What do you think are key learnings you collected at Typeform? You would say that would have been very, very useful for you when you were at a larger organization.
That's a really good question, because I often think about it in the reverse. Like what are some of the learnings I brought? Yeah,
I do
exactly.
it too all the time. So
Yeah.
it's actually quite funny. So when you used to work for a very large organization, then you're in a very small organization, you're like, okay, well, those things were actually quite cool. So that was pretty useful. You could totally rely on this. But on the other hand, there are some things that are so interesting and so useful in smaller organizations that would also be very
Yeah.
very igniting in larger organizations.
The best way I can answer that question is to just reflect on where I've really grown as an individual, as an employee, being at Typeform. So if I think about my own development over the last 3 years, I think that I have become much bolder and braver, right? You take more risk, you're bolder with your opinions, you're braver with your opinions, because you don't have the luxury of, it's in a larger company, when you take risk, in a lot of ways, it's mitigated, right? In a smaller company, it's amplified. So you're always having to learn to take risk and to be bolder. So I've learned that. And for HR professionals, you know, a lot of us tend to be much more thoughtful, methodical, risk adverse. But you can't do that because you're trying to really grow a business and you're building something and it's exciting, but you also have to be much bolder and a risk taker. So that's one difference. The other is that it's the importance of relationships and the ability to influence and meet people where they're at, because you literally are working with folks, and especially leaders in my situation, that have varying levels of experience. You know, some have been in worked for only small companies. Some are founders, and they're made very differently, you know, than your executives and CEO types at much bigger companies. So you learn to adapt your style. You learn to, you know, to communicate in a different way to a much wider type of audience. There, you don't get like the cookie cutter, gosh, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, cookie cutter, you know, executive suit at a big company. They are very, very, very diverse. In a you know, you have a very diverse leadership slate in startup environments. Anyways, that's been my experience, and also where I've really grown and developed.
Where do you think can both startups, scale-ups, and also mature companies can learn from each other in terms of, well, how quickly an organization acts, or in terms of how open you are to new approaches and new technology?
I think larger organizations should take note, I think, and learn about. I think larger organization can learn a lot more, I think, from smaller organizations. You know, today's employees are much more savvy. They're much more engaged in the mission of the company. They, you know, they span across multiple demographics, you know, from location to age to, you know, life experiences. And it's, you know, and they're demanding that we meet them where they're at with the types of benefits and programs that we offer, with how we communicate with them. And that's totally fair. I think in a smaller company, you're able to recognize that a lot more quickly. I think you can build, you know, closer relationships with your employees, and you are recognizing that much faster than in larger organizations who are not customizing how they're building programs and benefits for their employees, for example, or how they're targeting their communication. It's a lot harder for them to meet their employees where they're at. The other thing is this thing around remote work, right? Holding on to, we want everybody in the office. We want to be able to see each other and collaborate. There's fair points in making those arguments, but I'm seeing larger companies be insistent on that more and more. And I just think that they're very out of touch, I think, with the realities of you know, the evolving workforce, but also with just the future of remote work. And so I think that it's no coincidence that smaller companies, startups, are more open to remote work. They're more open to hybrid work. They're like, you can work anywhere you want as long as the deliverables are met. and figuring out different ways to collaborate virtually. They are doing that much more effectively, I think, than larger companies who are like still stuck on, we want everybody back in the office.
What are the main things that are on your plate at the moment? So what well, the last few years were pretty crazy in terms of, well, getting people on board. Last year was a bit of a consolidation phase. So what's currently very much on your mind?
We have a very, at Typeform, we have a very intentional long-term people strategy, and it's really focusing on 3 key pillars. Driving employee engagement, increasing talent density, and transforming our culture. And they're all connected, and everything that we do and every conversation that we have, every program or initiative that we implement is with those 3 pillars in mind. And last year, we were going through a lot of transformation as far as new leaders coming into the organization, looking at gaps in our capabilities and where we can invest by developing our internal workforce, where we can, invest by bringing in new skills into the organization. So last year, we spent a lot of time on talent density. This year, after having a new leadership in place for, coming on a year now, and a very clear business strategy, clearer than we've ever been about, what we want to do as a company, directionally, where do we want to focus, our new product roadmap. So all of those things we've been very intentional about, very clear with. Now we're saying, all right, in order for us to deliver on our business strategy, what needs to transform in our DNA, in our culture, in order to get there. So what we are focused on right now specifically is, new values. We're going to be introducing new values. We're going to be, introducing a culture code. Again, very intentional around what are those things that we need to focus on in order to be able to deliver on this very exciting and important business strategy that we have laid out for the workforce for Typeform. And of course, employee engagement, I spoke about workforce engagement is the underpinning of it all, right? So it's throughout everything we do. Employee engagement is there, but right now we're specifically focusing on culture transformation.
These 3 areas, engagement, density, and culture. Who defined those 3 pillars? Was it something you came up with, or how did you develop this?
It was really, first of all, it started with the work that I did with our CEO and our leadership team at the time. What are some of the things that are really necessary for us to continue to grow and make Typeform successful? And so those conversations began at the leadership team. Those pain points and future ambitions, then I brought to my leadership team on the people and culture team. Together, a strategy for the business. We have product roadmaps and we have operational plans, but we've never really been intentional about a people strategy. And we can't do all of this without a clearly defined people strategy. People are at the center of everything we do. We need them. And so that's how the conversations started. And so the people and culture team drafted the 3 pillars.
when you talk about the new values you will be or you're working on at the moment, what are the well, what is the input there? So how do you define which values are important and which are perhaps not explicitly mentioned as core values?
Yeah. So if I take a step back, values are a component of your culture. And so if I step back and say we are looking at kind of really transforming culture, it's a little bit of transforming culture. It's a little bit of articulating culture too. It's funny. I started off by asking the question of if Typeform was a person, how would you describe Typeform? Because really culture is the character of your company. And I got so many different answers. So I was doing a little bit of kind of discovery when I was thinking about this initiative. And everybody gave me a different answer. And guess what? That answer was really tied to your experience around your tenure, your experience around where you sat, were you in Europe, were you in the US? The group you were in, if you were in product, you have a different experience than if you're in engineering. So the conclusion was there was no one Typeform. And when you're trying to define your culture, the character of your company, you got to be defining it with a uniform voice. It cannot be, so splintered, right?
Different to everyone.
It's different for everyone. The other thing is, it's so many of us think that, the culture that the company had when you came into the company, and specifically talking about, those folks who start with a startup at the very early stages, and they remember that company in its earliest stages as a startup. And, the culture that was present then, they hold on to that culture, and they, of course, companies evolved, companies change, cultures change. And then you have folks that are, joining at different phases, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, remember the early days, remember when we used to do this and that. And you have to recognize that culture is a product. And just like the company's product evolves, so does your culture. And I heard this. This is not I'm not going to take credit for that statement. I heard it at a conference recently, and it was something that was shared by the CEO of HubSpot. And she's like, I look at culture as a product, and it has to evolve. And when you hear that, all of a sudden, that's very liberating, because you think, okay, there is permission to be talking about transforming culture. You have permission to do that. You also have permission to talk about your values and ask the question, are they still relevant to a business problem that we're trying to solve for now, to something that is top of mind now? And when you do that, then you give your permission to revisit both culture and your values. And that's what we did. Our values have been with us for 5 years. They served us really well when they were implemented 5 years ago, right? But we're a very different company now than we were before the pandemic, which was 5 years ago, 4 years ago now. And so that's how the conversation again got started. And we didn't want it to be a top-down approach. We didn't want it to be a bottoms-up approach to building up our values. We wanted it to be both. It was important to hear the leadership perspective. And it was also important to hear the employee perspective. So what we're doing right now, we're in the midst of doing this. We actually started with some questions and focus groups that we held. We asked the question, if Typeform was a person.
I love that question, by the way.
Yeah,
It's
right?
absolutely amazing.
Exactly. And, what are those important things that we need to really think about and do in order to move this strategy that has now been so well articulated to our population? What does it take for us to be successful driving the strategy forward? And, and also what's missing, right? It's great to say, well, we want to be a very customer-centric organization. Well, are we one today? What are the gaps? And so you have to also be able to identify what are those things within your culture, in your values that you do well today, and what are those things that are aspirational, where there is a gap. You still want to do them, but there is a gap between where you're at and where you should be. So it's also important to call those things out. So we have come up with 3 to 5 values right now. And we are vetting those with the focus groups again and getting their feedback. And we're going to go back to the drawing board and jazz them up, as I say. We started off with 5 values. It occurred to me that we could just do 3 for now. 3 really powerful ones, which I think we've got. And it's okay to add more later and iterate on the process. So yeah, fresh off the press, we might end up with 3 values.
Laura, I love that thought. Think about the company as a person and what would come to mind, because you can also then kind of visualize, well, a person also evolves, a person also grows up, right? So when you think about the values that serve someone or serve a company, well, at the age of, let's say, 5 or 10 years, it's a completely different thing at 20 years. And well, none of us wears the clothes from, from our childhood, right? So therefore, this was it an amazing analogy.
Yeah, your needs change too as an employee, right? As you go through different stages of growth and different stages of life. And it's not easy coming up with a culture code or set of values that speak to everybody.
Exactly.
And that's okay. We don't aim to speak to everybody. What we want to do is we want to say, these are the things that are important to our company today. These are the things today. That's the key word, today. And these are the things that are going to make us successful. And we want people that are buying into this. And hopefully some of that will speak to you. Some of that will say, yes, I want to be part of a company that is obsessed with their customer. I want to work for a company that, is encourages candor and open conversation and conflict openly, and because they think that's the best way to innovation and having more effective conversations. So some of that will speak to you, and some of that will not speak to you, and that's okay. Maybe that's not a place that is right for you. And by articulating that, we are very clear about what we're expecting, and we're leaving the choice up to the employee to buy in or not.
Laura, I have one last question for you. I'm wondering about your view, well, on the future of HR, how HR will develop in the next few years. What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know everyone is talking about AI, and no doubt, that is something that will really transform how we deliver HR services.
Mm-hmm.
I used to talk about how everything that we did in HR was either a product or a service, right? So we were either developing a product or delivering a service. I've been actually reflecting on that, and I'm like, okay, in the age of AI, is that really true? Yes, there's still going to be product, there's still going to be services, but that's going to look different, right? The way things are developed or rolled out, or services brought to employees, customizable services and experiences that are brought to employees are going to look very different. It's going to be automated. It's not going to have necessarily a human or a team at the center of it. And so where does that leave HR? And I think we need to think about how we are organized in HR and and specifically how we organized around solving for business problems. And so my mind is very much around two things. How do I build a team around me that is very customer focused, in the sense that they are constantly looking at how do we solve for business problems? How do we bring solutions to business problems? Like, for example, talent density. That's how it started, right? We need to increase the level of skills and capabilities in the organization. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that through internal development. We're going to do that through external acquisition, right? We're trying to solve a business problem. Well, to solve that business problem, it's not just HR business partners who are doing that. It's not just talent acquisition. It's not just total rewards. It's all of those functions working closely together and coming together around that one business problem. So the way I need to be structured in the future as an HR function is, around delivery of solutions. And that means being less siloed as an HR function. So maybe the concept of centers of expertise will no longer exist, right? Maybe the HR professional of the future is not an expert in just one area. They have an expertise, but they're not just sitting in that expertise, but they're more of what we call a T-shaped employee, and they can span across multiple areas.
So it's less about knowledge, but about capability to use several sources of information to create new knowledge then.
It's about understanding what the problem is, falling in love with that problem, as they say, and and obsessing over how do we solve for that problem. And in case of HR, it's people, right? It's people solutions. It's how do we use, our most important asset that we have in a way that drives our success forward, that enables the company to execute and more as a company to drive their strategy forward.
Laura, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure talking to you. And I'm very excited to learn what in the end the 3 values will be. And it's honestly pretty amazing that you narrowed it down from 5 to 3. Well, it's super exciting. And well, thanks again. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And thanks to all of you guys for listening in, and speak next time.